All right, so we are continuing our discussion with percentages on page 109 of topic 4 on block 2, application of percents. Some benchmark percents are shown in the tape diagram, and benchmark percents are they're important things to know. So when we talk about benchmarks, we're talking about 50% is an easy benchmark, right? Because 50% is half of something. If you know what the whole is, you can pretty much anytime figure out what the half is. Then the cool thing about that is if you know what half is, then you can probably figure out what half of half is. And half of half would be 25%, right? Because that's half of the half. And then completely unrelated is it's pretty easy to find 10% of something. 10% of something isn't that hard to find. So just bear with me here. I'm going to increase my screen size just a bit here. There we go. All right. So let's take a look at this tape diagram here. First of all, in this tape diagram, of course, 0 is 0%, and 250 is 100%. So if we know what 100% is, we can find 50% because that's going to be half, right? So we can find that by simply dividing by 2, cutting something in half. Half of 250 is 125. So that's not so hard. Now, if we know what half is, we could probably find what half of the half is. So we just divide by 2 again to find 25% because it's half of the half. 62.5. See? Take 125, divide it by 2, you get 62.5. That was easy. Half of the half. Now, the other benchmark percent, 10 isn't so bad because with 10%, whatever number you've got there, like in this case, 250, if you put your decimal there, because that's where it belongs, to find 10% of something, all you have to do is divide by 10. And when you divide something by 10, all you're doing is moving your decimal point one place back. So 10% of 250 is 25. Those are easy benchmarks. Easy peasy. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now, here's the cool thing. Going back to the 50 and the 120 and the 25 thing, right? If you can find the half, you can find the half of the half. Well, then you can also find what 75% is because you're going to take this and add it to your 50. 25 plus 50 is 75, right? So 62 and a half plus 125 is, what is that? That's 187 and a half, because that's going to be your 75%. So how great is that? All our benchmark percents can be taken care of in 2 ways. Finding the half of the half, adding that half of the half to the half to find 75%. And then to find 10%, it's easy. You just move the decimal place one spot. Matter of fact, if we wanted to find 1% of something, well, then we have to move the decimal just one more spot. So if we wanted to find, like, say, 1%, if we wanted to be super crafty, then 1% would just be 2.5. Boop, 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 right there, 2.5. So a lot of cool benchmarks, 50, 25, 10, and 1. Oh, and don't forget 75. The half of the half added to the half will give you 75%. All right. Now, moving right along, right? We're having so much fun. We're moving right along. Hope you're having a good time. I know I am. This says, what percent of 250 is 221? And it says solve by both an equation and a proportion. So let's take a look at this. This sentence right here, what percent of 250 is 221? That's a math sentence. And the cool thing about math sentences is everything in a math sentence means something mathematically. For example, what percent? Well, anytime you see the word what, that's going to be your unknown. That's the thing you're looking for. And then of, the word of means multiply. Always. And then 250, well, 250 just means 250, people. It's a number, right? Is, the word is means equals. It always has, always will. Just a second. And one last thing here. And 221 is just 221 because it's a number. So this sentence, what percent of 250 is 221, works out to be a really handy math equation. So what is x times 250? Well, that's just 250x, right? Equals 221. There, now all we have to do is solve for x by dividing by 250. Now there are some things that we have to understand when we do this. 221 divided by 250, let's see, Mr. Calculator, is 0.884, and that's a decimal. So of course we would have to multiply that times 100 to get our percent. It means we move our decimal 2 places to the right, and we end up with 88.4% equals x. Okay, now let's go back up and look at the tape diagram. One more thing, because I forgot to do this part here. Now, all these benchmark percents are great, but does that really help us find exactly what 221 is going to be? Well, no, not really. But we know that it's somewhere between 75 and 100. And since 75% is, 187.5, and 221, well, you can see it's a little bit further toward 250. It's a little bit further toward the 100. So if I were going to be estimating this, I would say, well, it's probably about 90%, around the neighborhood of 90%, just because of its location on the tape diagram. And like I said, tape diagrams are great if you can understand where the benchmarks are, and you have to do a fair amount of estimating. Now, back to question number 2. Now, it said to solve both by an equation and a proportion. So if we look at proportions, and this is the proportion that you're going to want to use anytime that you're solving percentage deals, right? You're always going to have a part and a whole, because that's going to be your percent out of your 100. Okay, so in this case, our part was 221 out of 250, and that's going to be related to our 100 out of our x. We're looking for that. What percent is that? Now, we already know what it is based on what we did in our equation, but still, let's take it a step further and say, all right, here I got this really great proportional equation set up, right? I've got 2 ratios that are equivalent to each other. Now, what I have to do is, how do I convert? What do I multiply 250 by to make 100? Because I'm going to do that same thing up here. Well, to find out what that is, it's kind of like I have to find the scale factor. And so to find scale factor, you always take your new amount, which in this case is the 100, and you divide that by the old amount, which in this case is the 250. New divided by the original amount. Oh, come on. It's not letting me draw my 0. I hate that. There we go. Now, 100 divided by 250, of course, divided by 250 is 0.4. So that means that is our quote unquote scale factor that we would have to multiply here. And if we multiply it in the denominator, we have to multiply it in the numerator. So 221 times 0.4 is 88.4, which is exactly what we found over here as well. So a couple of different ways to find the percentage of something based on what you see. All right. So far, so good. No questions so far. Remember, if you have a question, just type a question mark in the chat. Now, this next part, I'm going to shrink my view down just a bit. It says to complete the sentences to practice finding the part, whole, or percent. Choose the method you think would be best for each. Well, there's a sentence for each of these that we could find out. And there's also, of course, a proportion. I kind of like the proportion because it's the same, every time or with very little variation. Let's look at question number A. Curtis has sold 13 boxes of popcorn out of the 40 boxes he has to sell. So they want to know what percentage of his popcorn has he sold. So if you look at it this way, he has, remember part to whole, right? Part to whole. That would be 13 out of 40. And we want to know what percent is that out of 100. So a way to look at that would be to go, all right, well, how do I take 40 and make it 100? What do I have to multiply 40 by to make 100? Because I'm going to multiply my top one by that same number. So I would take the 100, divide by 40, right? 100 divided by 40, 2.5. And so that is my scale factor. And 13 times 2.5 is 32.5. Very good. Yes, I see that in the chat. 32.5%. Now, if we were going to write this as a sentence in sentence form, you would say, okay, what are we looking for? We are looking for the percentage. So if we were going to write this as let me type this out as a sentence just for fun, right? We are looking for 13 is what percent of 40? Because isn't that what we're looking for? 13 is what percent of 40? And so if we're going to rewrite this as an equation, right? If we wrote this as an equation, then this would be 13 is what percent of 40? And if we were to rewrite this as a decent equation, it would be 13 equals 40x. And we divide both sides by 40. Those 40s cancel each other out. And 13 divided by 40, x would be equal to 0.325. But that's not a percent, is it? Remember, that's a decimal, and that has to be converted to a percent. We multiply that by 100. That means that we move our decimal 2 places to the right, 1, 2, and we get 32.5%. So there are, like I said, 2 different ways to do each of these. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at, now, is it okay? Are you okay if I erase what I've got here? Because I've obviously run myself out of room. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Whoops, there we are. Okay, now question B. I think, yes, we have time. Question B, John made 40% of his attempted free throws. So he made 40% of his attempted free throws, and he attempted 15. Okay, so that means 40 out of 100, right? 40%. And the number that he attempted is 15. So that's going to be our whole. And so we're looking for how many did he make? All right. So we need to take a look at how do we get from 100 to 15. So we divide 15 by 100. And when we do that, we get 0.15. And 40 times 0.15 is 6. So yes, I see that answer in the chat. 6. He made 6 of his free throws. Now, if we wanted to type this one as a question, we could. And it would look like this. Let's see. And it would be 40%, whoops, percent of what number is, wait a minute, sorry about that. Nope. 40% of 15 is what number? That's what it is. And there's our question that we can turn into an equation if we wanted to. 40% of 15 is what number? Okay. And it appears that I am just about out of time. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and we will talk about weighted grades tomorrow. So